I got this idea to start this travel talk series because I noticed that all my travel conversations that I've had either online with the travel community or even offline events where I mingle with fellow travelers, I never really felt I got to the point to get to the really good stuff about travel stories. So it's more of where you've been, what you've done, and then it's time to go home. So I was hoping with the series that we could kind of cut the chit-chat and get straight to the really, really good stories about travel, about why we travel and why we, what travel does to us. So my idea was, for instance, like when you go travel and when you meet travelers on the road, at least from my experiences, I meet so many people and they have shared so many fascinating life stories. And it seems to me that travel really do something to you. And again, the incentives to travel. And travel is so personal. So everyone has very different reasons to go travel and what they seek when they travel and what they bring with them home. So today we're going to talk about expat living, about going to a new country and how it is to settle in a new culture, getting adjusted, building a network, and maybe dealing with some difficult phases from that experience. So I'm going to, in a very few seconds, let Lee talk, which is our speaker. But very first, I just want to go through the logistics. This is our first talk, so we might change the concept a little bit for next time, but I was planning on having Lee talk about his experiences for about 20 minutes, and then we have two other speakers here that is going to be kind of coming up as part of the panel. They've been living many years abroad, and they just got back. And if you have questions, I was hoping that instead of just asking Lee these questions, we get one angle, we can ask, or you can ask all three of them, and maybe we can get some different perspectives and different angles to these questions. So some people have already tweeted us with some very interesting questions that I know Lee is dying to answer later. We're also going to give Kristen there and Paul the chance to answer them later. But so that's the logistics. And also, if you have stories you want to share, feel free to make it heard, but also very short, because we don't have a lot of time. And we know from experience that when people start talking about travel, it's very hard to stop them. So keep it very short and get to the point quickly if you want to share something. So I'm going to take that advice myself and stop talking, and we'll introduce you to Lee O'Brien, my co-host for the Travel Talk.
Great, thank you. Good evening. First of all, thank you all for coming tonight. This was just a little concept that we happened to be talking about last year, and just so stoked to see so many people here. You know, this is might be a little diversion from the usual meetup where you get to talk and someone else is just talking all the time, but I'll make it quick, like you said. So, and second of all, being an expat, and I know the fellow expats will definitely agree with this, I'm stoked to be able to come and tell you my story, and you guys actually want to hear it. And you guys actually are going to be cool with hearing it and not going to get some glazed eyes and kind of lose interest because we don't relate. One thing about expat living and living abroad is, and I wanted to say this first of all, is the style of living abroad is such a complex idea. All right? Someone can go abroad and work for the embassy and have everything taken care of and be sent there on a mission and have kind of very much a very, not pampered, but very cared for lifestyle. And then I'm going to talk about the other side of the spectrum. So I won't get into too much about these prearranged living abroad styles. I'm going to talk about a guerrilla style of living abroad, because that's what I did. To set the stage, I was born and raised here in the Bay Area. I'm a third-generation Californian. I think that's a whole different meetup group, so I'm not going to talk about that. But third-generation Californian, so I grew up diehard Californian-American style of living. And by the time I finished college, I was dying to go and travel. So when I finished, I went off to Europe for about 5 months and had 2 key moments over there. First of all, I got stuck in northwestern Spain for about a week where I couldn't speak any English whatsoever. And all that did was force me to speak Spanish. And all that did was motivate me to learn Spanish at some point. And I also ended up staying with a childhood friend of mine. And this guy had studied over in Paris through university and spoke fluent French to the point where he was picking out accents, ripping on announcers for not speaking well, etc., etc. You know, when I'd seen this guy 5 years earlier talking horrible English and bad-mouthing people. So I thought, hey, if he could learn it, I could possibly do it. So I was really motivated by that. And what that turned into was in the year 2000, here in San Francisco, as those of you who are here knew, that was the first .com boom. People were just throwing out crazy ideas and getting millions of dollars for their ideas. There was a lot of fat, not too much muscle, and a lot of crazy stuff going on, and a lot of job opportunities. And still, I bucked all that to go and live abroad because I wanted to learn Spanish and I wanted to go check out Latin America. So at the end of mid 2000, I went down to Central America for 5 months, traveled back through Central America, and fell in love with Costa Rica. I had some contacts down there, I had some friends down there, and I found a way to learn Spanish. So at the end of 2000, I packed up my few things that I had, which were a few pieces of clothes, and moved down to Costa Rica. No job, no house, no nothing. Just a couple of months, and just a dream to learn some Spanish and work abroad. What happened was I worked for 3 months looking for work. I did very odd jobs, did this, did that. Finally one day answered an ad to do what a lot of people do when they go abroad. I turned into a door-to-door salesman. I went and sold coupon books door-to-door, had no Spanish whatsoever. Like I said, that's a whole other meetup. I can get into details about that. But for the next 2 years, I sold door-to-door coupon books, shoulder to shoulder with the Mormons, going through Costa Rica, went down to Panama City for 6 months, came back to Costa Rica for a year, and then moved down to Peru. And for the next 6 months in Peru, I worked with 2 different partners. We opened up an office in Lima, and kept selling coupon books until I was falling out with my partner, in which then I left that and went to a publicity company and worked in sports sponsorships for another 6 months. Basically what we did is we represented the #1 soccer team in Lima, and we went and made cold calls and got all the endorsements that were on their jerseys and in their stadium. That didn't work out too well, and so by mid-2004 I left, came home for a couple months, and hooked up a job through a friend of mine from college down in Ecuador. And I proceeded to move to Ecuador, where I lived for 5 years. First 2 years I spent exporting flowers and working with an online system that used flower sales and whatnot, created tickets for the sales. And then I got into fruit export for a year and a half. Started a business down there with some partners down there, and we exported exotic and tropical fruits to Europe and the United States. I'll just put it this way, I don't want to go into detail there, professional differences. That's why we separate. I just gave you the very edited version of that story. And then from there, I started working in media. What happened when I was living in Peru, when I was selling door to door, I stumbled into a house one day, and the guys that I was pitching my coupon books to said, hey, they had a camera sitting out there just like this, and they said, hey, you want to do a casting? I said, yeah, sure. So I walked in front of the camera. 5 castings later, they put me on a national commercial. So when I got to Ecuador, I said, hey, I'd been in a commercial before, let's go check out the media biz. So I started working media, started doing voiceover, started doing subtitle translation, and got on some commercials and infomercials. And then I ended my time abroad teaching English. Kind of reverse engineered the normal American route. Usually you go there to teach English first and then get all the cool jobs. I kind of did the first stuff and then I started teaching English. Throughout my 9.5 years abroad, I actually had only a year where I had a legitimate visa. What that means is for 8 years, I spent time learning how to cross borders, learning how to pay late fines, and learning the ins and outs of the law system and trying to find a legitimate lawyer. Because half of those 8 years were spent with lawyers that were taking my money but just not doing any work because their best friends weren't in power at that point. So that was a whole other experience in the visa realm. And so for 9.5 years, I like I said, guerrilla style, started businesses, was employed from abroad, started up businesses too on my own with partners, and then also started being employed in country, especially when I started doing the teaching and the media work. What happened is during my time is I had to teach myself not only Spanish, but with the help of my friends. I always say that the good thing that came from my ex-girlfriends is I learned how to dance, I learned how to speak Spanish, so something good happened. But apart from that, I had to go and just devour the culture. I couldn't learn, I couldn't get by just being an American. I had to go and learn what the Latino method was. And so I had a huge experience going to birthday parties, going to meetings, going to normal everyday activities like a meetup here. And I remember, actually it just dawned on me, I remember my first time speaking in front of a group in Spanish was when we had our door-to-door sales company, our direct publicity. I had to do a training in front of about 100 different sellers, and they had to throw it down in Spanish. And so I didn't know how to do it very well. So what I did is I did this thing where we talked, like the theme was taking control of the prospect. So what I did is I sat there and I kind of mumbled something horrible Spanish at that point because I was speaking horribly. And I kind of wandered back and started taking their attention and just kind of sat back there until they all looked at me, and it was just kind of this moment where I didn't know Spanish well enough, but I just kind of finagled it, so I got to throw the point home on the training. So that was my big first speaking in Spanish, so it's nice to be here speaking in English about that. But I wanted to bring up, I think there were 3 points that I really wanted to hit home about what I learned abroad. The first one is the word acceptance. I struggled, all my friends struggled, and a lot of foreigners struggle when they go to a new place with the new culture. And sometimes what we do is we bring our old paradigms and our old mentalities with us, and we think, geez, they don't make the coffee like I make it back home. They don't pour the drinks like they make it back home. They don't cook the food like they make it back home. My free advice is accept the culture as it is. What you do with it after is going to become a lot easier once you've accepted it. And a lot of people sit there and they come to a new culture, and sometimes we do it from our own culture looking at others. And we kind of judge, and we rank. I can't stand listening to the first and third world. First of all, they skip the second world, I never mentioned. So second of all, who makes these rankings? We have one world. One world we live in. And that's what we got to remember when we're thinking about our judgments. We just accept that other people have it. I paid the price for years, sitting there trying to force my own paradigms on my new situation. Don't do it. Just accept it. And what you do after that accepting is going to really be powerful for you living abroad. I think another thing too is being that I was a person that devoured the culture. I mean, I knew everything. I knew the latest pop artists. I knew all the novelas. I lived with a couple women in Panama, so I was forced to watch telenovelas every night. I knew about all the up things on politics. I could chat politics with the best of them. I could sit with taxi drivers and pick apart their family and figure out what they're going to be doing this weekend. Blah, blah, blah. And always hit the sayings right. But sometimes you got to make sure, and I want to say this right, you got to know when to ration your passion for other cultures. I sometimes, for example, and I'll be straight up, Latino culture likes to drink. I'll be honest, I spent many days in a row drinking just to fit in with the Latino culture. Sounds awesome. It sounds great. But trust me, when you get into those days in succession and you don't, you start feeling it physically, you start feeling it mentally, I'll admit, I got into some times when that wasn't the right thing to do. But you know what? It was because my mentality was, I'm going to accept the culture and play it out. That's one thing that definitely you can do when you're going abroad. I see people go abroad all the time. They're so stoked on a new culture and a change that they think it's the best thing going, and you want all of it. And it's always sometimes good to know when is when, and when you should back off. And another thing I think, the final point I'll make about living abroad, is you can do almost anything living abroad. And I don't mean that in a reckless, adventurous, crazy mentality. At one point, I was just some gringo who didn't speak any Spanish, and 48 hours later, I was knocking on doors selling coupon books in Spanish. I knew it one day, all I thought, there were red and white roses in the world. And 2 days later, I realized and learned about 450 plus varieties of roses in the world, let alone all the lilies that I was exporting, let alone all the Equis flowers that I was exporting. I went from a guy who'd never been in front of a camera before, never wanted to act, to being on commercials, infomercials, laying down the voiceovers for tracks. If you go abroad and you're worried about the work, and you're worried about what you're going to do, I'll nail it down to 3 steps. Study the country you're going to. Maybe there are industries you don't know about that are happening there big time. We now have the resources. Back then, we didn't have the cool internet. It was the 30-minute upload, and hang out, wait, and there was no Craigslist, there was no meetup, there was no any kind of entity to help me out. So I had to go and knock on doors and ask people. Study the country, tap your network. We're becoming a global world, so there's people you know in a lot of countries, or there's people you know people in a lot of countries. And third, be open and flexible. I've seen doctors in the States become teachers abroad. And I've seen non-salesmen become managers of 40-person sales offices. If you're open and you're flexible, you're going to learn some really cool skills, and you're going to be an asset somewhere else, and you won't have to worry about how you're living abroad. All right? I really appreciate you guys listening to me. I think I'm kind of short. I don't know if I'm kind of too short. But I'm just really stoked, like I said. Usually when I tell my stories to people after I've come home, there's a little bit of a glazed eyes with it. The people who have been in country and haven't gone out just don't know exactly how to relate to it. And it's really cool that I can come here and tell and hopefully inspire some people here to take my words and go act on it. Because that's what happened to me. I saw a friend sitting in Paris who went over there for university and spoke just as well as the locals. I saw people that were traveling through Latin America, living abroad, living in Costa Rica, and they inspired me. And I'm hoping just some of my words can inspire you. So thank you for your time. So what we'd like to do is we're going to invite a couple friends of ours, Kristen. We do, yeah. We're going to actually, what we want to do on the Q&A is I actually want to invite, we were fortunate to have 2 other expat experienced Americans here that can share their experiences and whatnot. They're going to give a brief introduction of what they live. But also what we want to do is add some dimensions to the questions. I'll admit, I can tell you anything about Guerrilla Style, I can tell you lots about Latin America. When it comes to Europe and Asia, I'm not going to misinform you, nor am I going to know anything about it. So I'd like to invite Kristen and Paul up to the stage, and they will give a little slight introduction, and then we'd love to do a Q&A to finish off. So, Kristen, please fire away.
Hi, nice to meet all of you. My name's Kristen. So a little bit about my story. I lived abroad for about 7 years in Germany and in Denmark. So 4 years in Germany and then 3 in Copenhagen, Denmark. My story, I don't know if I want to call it guerrilla style, but it was definitely not the luxurious path, I suppose. So what happened basically is I've always had this kind of weird innate desire for culture and language and travel as young as I can remember. I can honestly remember thinking I would love to go travel one day. At a very young age, I had this kind of desire in me. And so even in middle school and high school, I started learning German. So I chose German. And while I was doing my undergraduate degree in college, I ended up studying abroad for a year in Germany, and that kind of really fired up this insane passion for culture and language. And so after that year abroad, I moved back to the U.S. just to finish my studies. And at the end of my studies, I had an option, and that was either I could do what I felt society was pressuring me to do, and that was to get a big kid job, to buy a house, to start a family. So I had that option, or I had the option to actually pursue what I loved, and that was language and travel. And so I was really torn. And so I actually decided, all right, well, I'm going to apply. I'm going to apply for a job and force myself into a decision. Because if I get an offer, then I have to either accept it or I don't. And I actually received a pretty good offer as a kid, just getting out of college, and I turned it down. So I think I had maybe $200 in my bank account, and I moved to Germany. And that's how I started my life there. So I ended up, I did start teaching English, and I knew the system already since I had lived there for just a year, but did my studies there. So I already kind of knew the system in terms of how one gets a visa. So I started teaching English. As a native American English speaker, that was very easy, actually. So I started teaching English. I already had in mind that I wanted to do a graduate studies program. So I ended up applying and was matriculated into a German graduate program. So my graduate studies were actually about 98% in German. And then from there, I was hired full-time with a company in Copenhagen, Denmark. So that's what we would do from Germany to Copenhagen. And then I was there for 3 years. So that's kind of the high-level overview of my story. Is that good enough for now?
That's awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Paul. I recently moved back from Japan, where I lived for about 3 years, and it was quite an experience. So I moved back about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago now, and I lived over there for 3 years, like I said, and with one previous experience before that for about 4.5 months. And how did I get involved with living abroad? I don't know. Somehow it happened somewhere down the line. No. When I was in college in Stockton, California, where I lived for the past 10 years or so, I just really had this desire to get out there, see something different, you know. And I figured, well, Japan, why not? It's different. It sounds different enough. And I didn't know really how different it would be. It was pretty different. It was quite different enough for me, but. So I had a pretty interesting series of experiences there. I went the first time 4.5 months on study abroad through my university. So just taking Japanese classes, mostly taking it easy, drinking a lot of beer, not doing anything too serious. And then the second time, so I moved back to the States, and I'm like, wow, well I learned some Japanese now. How do I keep going? I don't want to just quit, while I'm here. So I started getting involved with cultural studies at my university and the Japanese cultural club and all that. And kind of worked more on my skills, so like Japanese and everything like that. And then I went back for another year and studied abroad after I finished college because I didn't know what to do, just like everybody else. And then after about a year, I found a really cool kind of job experience in Japan. And so I signed up to work in a research lab. Sorry, I didn't mention too much about my background. I was studying some sciences, so biochemistry, and then I got really interested in neuroscience. And there was a really, really nice lab out there in Kyoto, Japan, doing a lot of cutting-edge research on neuroscience. And I thought it was super cool. I wanted to take that opportunity. I tried applying for a program to work there and simultaneously get my master's out there. And what I thought at the time was luckily I got accepted and lived there for 2 years. But it was kind of a very challenging experience personally for me. So I don't know, these guys, there's lots of different stories living abroad. I have, from my previous recent experiences, I have kind of like a little bit of a negative tinge to it. But, at the same time, I understand it was a growing experience. It's good to be out there. But yeah, I became sort of Japanese. I spoke Japanese like in my classes, and, so I took my classes in Japanese as well. And data communication was in Japanese, so it's really... There's kind of like this, break. It's almost like you start developing another personality, working with such a different kind of culture and different kind of language. So I can share some experiences with that if you guys have any questions.
Awesome.
Yeah, I personally have many questions for you. I know there were one question from Twitter, and I hope you have some questions as well. I'm just going to start with one from Twitter while I remember it. And what she was asking was, what about if it's 140 characters, so I don't know exactly what she meant by what she said, but I think she was going towards, she said inequality and and expats moving into an area raises the prices, and you might not be welcomed by the locals because suddenly everything is exclusive and more fancy. Again, I don't know exactly what you meant, but I know we have some thoughts around there, and you can kind of bounce it over when you're done.
I wouldn't say that like abroad I experienced too much of price ranges going up because of foreigners moving in. I know that does occur in some areas, it happens with nationals in any country. People of certain wealth levels move into other areas. Technically, it's considered, a standard of living comes up. What I did experience and what I did interpret actually from the question was a difference in charging prices. And this is something you're going to see in anywhere where there's discrepancies in pricing, in standards of living, and in per capita income and whatnot. And at first, I'll be honest, that's once again the acceptance. I struggled with it. I was wondering, hey, why do they keep charging the gringo too much? And don't they know I'm working, with the locals and I'm getting paid here and blah, blah, blah. And I had all these justifications for it. And, in a sense, when you're living in a place where you're not making as much as someone else, you got to get yours. So I understand when they're going and trying to charge a little more. What I did realize, too, is in many cultures where they're doing that, there's also the ability to bargain. So if you learn about bargaining, you can just drop that price down and you don't have to worry about being overcharged. So I kind of at first kind of fought with it and struggled with it, but you know what? I've been to enough countries now that are technical third world and all this, lower income and lower levels of living. And when it comes to money, when it's so scarce like that, some people are going to do what they have to do to get it. And if that means charging all the tourists who come and the foreigners, well, then they're going to do it. And then what I also realized afterwards is I'm walking along as the backpacker cheapskate, lower paying guy. But there's a lot of people that love to come stay at the Marriott, pay tons of money to stay there, love to pay for really costly tours, and have no problem dropping whatever price they ask at the local markets and at the local tourism destinations. So to charge a different price just might be what's ingrained in the locals' perspective of us foreigners coming to their country, if that makes sense. So, okay. Please. Yeah.
Sorry, and actually, I don't know. Nobody really asked me. I'm just curious also how many of you guys have actually lived abroad. Maybe that's a good question to ask. Okay, just to kind of understand how much people already know about expat living, possibly.
Right.
But it. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. It's a very different experience wherever you go and stuff. But I was going to mention something that about that specifically too. That I know I visited my brother in Thailand, and so there's a really tight community of expats in Thailand. So, or at least where he's staying. So definitely, where in that region where they're staying, they do drive the prices up. I experienced that. So that can be seen as a negative. I don't know. It really depends on the culture. For Thailand, they actually, from what I understood, I only spent about 2 weeks out there, not very long. I didn't live there, but. They do enjoy having foreigners a lot because they have money. So whenever you can create an environment that a lot of people from, if you're a country that's kind of I don't say third world, but if you're still kind of developing, then obviously you will try to, if you have something for people to see, you'll try to attract attention from Western countries and stuff like that, and it'll drive the prices up. But it's usually good for the local population in terms of getting money. So I don't know. It's good. Yeah.
I don't know. I guess it sounds like the question was, well, there seems like there's a concern behind the question, and that is that doing harm to the local culture, the local community? When you have the traditional format of expatriate model, business supporting this very rich Western businesswoman or man going to an economy where maybe standard of living or whatever is lower. I don't know if it makes any sense, but it sounds like there's a concern in that. Right. I don't know if I have necessarily anything great to add to what you both said. Yeah, I mean, do you then not travel there because there's that concern? Maybe. You know, there's oftentimes, like, for example, I went to Dubai, and it was very, very sad for me to be there because I saw these, you know, huge vans being trucked in of people that obviously were making very little money. And then you have this very large expatriate community that was drinking, you know, champagne by the gallons and attending these big fancy brunches. And that discrepancy between those two populations was gross to me. And I couldn't take part in that myself, just morally, because I felt that's so, so sad. So I chose in that moment to not take part. I think my experience in Germany is very different. I was living as a local. I think learning the local language is, you experience that place, you're treated very differently. You actually make an effort to assimilate into that culture. It's a very different experience, that versus traveling as a business person or traveling as an expatriate being sponsored by a, you know, company. I mean, those experiences are very different. I don't know how you can even compare them. Quite honestly.
What did you do there?
I started working for a cross-cultural consulting and training company that I actually now still work for.
We had a question way back there.
Yeah, I've been curious about work permit and business permit, especially since work visa. You were all on tourist visa, I assume. No, you had a work visa.
I started
Or
off.
no visa, just go about. I mean, we don't need visa for Europe or Japan, so you just go there and just stay there. And how are you allowed to work or do business?
Should I?
Go ahead.
I did have a visa. When I first moved there, I started teaching English, and because I was a native English speaker, I received a working visa. Then I was a graduate student, so then I received a student visa. And then I was sponsored by a company and was able to apply, and they said, yes, we want her to work here, and this is why. And then I received a working visa. And so I definitely had a visa, it just wasn't a tourist visa.
How difficult is it to get a work visa in Europe?
It is difficult. And that is because typically you have to be filling a position that nobody else in Europe can technically fill. So,
Same as here.
so just going there speaking English, well, UK speaks a lot of English, so that's a little tricky. So that's why oftentimes we'll see if you have very specific expertise, if you are some sort of technical background, they need that sort of expertise. And it's fairly easy if you just want to go and start working it. That's pretty hard.
Yeah, I definitely at the beginning, my initial business and employment ventures were all some under the table, and a lot of times in regards to visa, what I would be able to get by on was when I had my paperwork in process. That would be enough to justify, any kind of employment gripes. But a lot of times, just had to avoid, presenting those. And I think Kristen brings up a really good point. The whole key when you're going abroad to get a work visa abroad, you got to prove why you're the one that should be there and getting that visa, and not a local. They're really worried about, a lot of countries are really worried about locals. And in terms of visas, I would definitely check your country and figure out what the types of visas are. I got really good experience in investigating work visas, religious visas, education visas, investor visas. And in some cases, investor visas in some countries are extremely low. It seems like around around 2005, around that area, a lot of countries all of a sudden spiked the investment amounts for investor visas. So that's something that might be off the table now, but depends on the country you're going to. I know Ecuador went from overnight, within a month's time, $1,500 to $25,000. So, it pays to do your due diligence ahead of time for an investor visa. But the idea, the concept I'm getting to is investigate the visas that you could possibly get. And in some countries, they're not as much sticklers for the visas, the exact visas, so you could get by on an education visa doing some jobs under the table and whatnot.
to associate with others?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, physically, I don't look Latino, so I definitely stuck out at a couple birthday parties. Acceptance, yeah, it's a great idea. You know what? I notice, myself included, a lot of expats go abroad and are so focused and single-minded on being accepted that there is none of that acceptance going on. And I felt I got really in tune with the local, cultures, and I made a lot of friends. Especially like in the time when I was doing the door-to-door sales, I was shoulder to shoulder with people from all classes of Latino culture. So it wasn't like, this is going to sound weird, the embassy people hang out with certain people. They don't go deep in cultures. If you're teaching at an international high school, the Latinos you're talking to or the people there are rich, upper class kids. So you're going to get that. You're not going to meet the middle class or the lower class. And it kind of got to a point where I stopped worrying about being accepted, and I just kind of rolled with it. And actually, sometimes you can get by being the foreigner and find the advantages of being that foreigner. You're always a novelty act. You're always the cool invitee, and they're always glad to have you at their parties, which is actually, kind of a nice little facet that I think we kind of lose in some of the developed countries when we're so focused on, production and work. They really appreciate friends and family. So if you come in and you're the foreigner invitee to their party, you're going to be treated really well for being a foreigner, for being different. So there is a silver lining.
Yeah, I second. Oh, sorry.
You can answer it.
Yeah, I second what we said, and for my own, obviously, I think different countries have different ways of doing things. It's kind of tough to lump everything together, but definitely in Japan, there is a very strong concept of like the Japanese, and then there's the foreigners. Like they really do that, and ironically for me, or I don't know, maybe it's not ironic, but living as a foreigner is just way better than living as a Japanese person. This is how I understood that. But the longer I stayed there, the more Japanese I spoke, the more I could integrate, and the more I realized that it's really difficult being a Japanese person. As a foreigner, they make all these kind of exceptions for you, and they say you have your own. You can fit in the sense that you have your own separate kind of identity in Japan. You're a foreigner in Japan, and they understand what that is. It's not like they're completely ignorant about outside cultures of their own, but they, obviously you will never be able to become Japanese, and getting Japanese citizenship is very, very difficult, and all of that. It's very tough to get accepted, and personally, I don't really know if you, for me, I don't know that I would want to either. It's like, it's a different kind of experience. Yeah, it's a good question.
For me, I actually can very easily be German. And I go to Germany and they look at me as though I'm German. And I think part of that was because of the language, speaking German fluently. And having been there for so long, I think I get the nuances of their language and culture. So similar to when somebody makes a comment about, a cultural reference that maybe somebody who's not from the U.S. might not get, I get those in the German language. And so I think that helped me fit in. And then just through relationships, I got to know family. I got to know German people as opposed to living there as a foreigner. I didn't have any American. All my friends are German. And so really I can fit very well into the German culture. In Denmark, it was a little bit different, I think, for me. I experienced a little bit more kind of the separation. That changed over time, but I found Denmark a little bit more exclusive because it was a smaller country. Not very many people in the world speak Danish. I speak Danish not very well. I can get by. I can understand it really well. So somebody can speak to me in Danish, and I can respond to them in English, or I could talk about things at the grocery store or traveling or that sort of thing, but not really the nuances of the language. And so I think I was always a little bit looked at as, well, she's going to leave eventually, kind of. Even though I was very well received and never felt as though I was discriminated against. But so it's a slightly different experience, but I never really felt like I couldn't fit in. So that's actually very foreign to me, what you're talking about.
I actually want to add to what Paul said about foreigners being cut some slack. And I know that from being a foreigner here, living here in the States, I kind of, if I ever get to that point, I will dread the moment where I totally lose my accent, because then I have nothing. Because Norwegians can be very blunt and very direct, and a lot of Americans are like, whoa. They're like, okay, she's Norwegian, like that's not the way they are. If they think I'm a normal American woman, then yeah, I'm not gonna have any friends.
Actually, there's something really funny to add to that. So, because I lived in Denmark for some years, I also became very accustomed to the Danish culture, which is also very direct, very, you get to it. And I find myself doing that in the U.S., and I can't. Most people think I'm kind of blunt and rude, so anyway, that's kind of the flip side of that. That's funny you say that. Different culture, yeah.
Comment on that. I think everybody here, especially living in California, probably had people say, "Hey, I'm at the party." And they'll go, "Yeah, I'll be there." They never show up, right? And there's a lot of people you'll meet that are very, very friendly, kind of on the surface. It's kind of a California thing about it. It's if you walk into the store, people are like trying to help you or whatever, and smiles, but it's kind of surface. And in other cultures, there's based on a long history of very important sort of survival need. When somebody says they're going to be your friend, it's this huge, it's like marriage, it's a huge commitment. And there is no surface. There's either you're my friend, and that involves an enormous commitment, or not. It's obviously a lot safer for yourself and your time to say no. So as an American, particularly in California, we have to be aware of that cultural difference. The reason people were seen to be completely unfriendly is actually they're just not going to make that commitment until you prove to them that that investment occurred.
Speaking from experience.
Oh yeah, sure, I've traveled. I would actually say that, but in particular, was I would say Denmark and Sweden and places where, well, actually it tends to be where the weather is harsher. You'll find that if you've ever been in Alaska, there's a very, very different. I lived in Alaska for 7 years. It's a completely different. This is apropos that, for instance, when I arrived in Alaska. There's about in Anchorage. When I arrived back in the 90s, there was probably a half a dozen stoplights. The entire city was a city of 200,000 people. And this is back in the days of cassettes. So imagine this. I'm in a red light. I start fooling around with the cassette. And when I look up, it's yellow going red. That means I missed the green light. There are 3 cars behind me. Nobody ever on. Think about that. Think about the mentality and the fact they're like, well, he's doing something. He must be. Nobody on. That's a different reality, right? It's a different interpersonal relationship.
I think we have one more question, and then we're gonna go back to drinking some wine, and we can continue the conversation.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment.
Okay, make your comment.
The reason that I want to leave this country is because what he's talking about. Americans act. You're in class with somebody. Everybody calls you their friend. Cross the street. You say hello to someone one time in your life. You meet someone at a party. They're your friend. But when it comes down to actually coming through for you as your friend, I have a problem with depression. I get depressed, the world disappears because we're afraid of it's contagious. I spend a lot of time in France since I'm 16. In France, in French, there's 2 words. There's copain, there's ami. For women, copine or ami. Huge world of difference between the 2. You can be really good buds with somebody. That's a copain or a copine. But a friend is like, you will die for that person. That person will always be your friend. good mood, bad mood, hard times, not fair weather. And that's why a lot of people don't like the American mentality of how shallow friendships are, how people call it a friendship, but and now with technology, it's even shorter. People will email you and tell you their entire history, and then you're supposed to meet for a coffee, and they never show up. You never hear from them again. That's over, and that's why I want to be there.
That's particular for California, the blinking.
It's in California.
It's not everywhere.
It's in California. That's
Yeah.
that.
All right.
Is there one question only? Yeah, okay, one more. That'd be a great one.
So what really interests me about travel is how it changes us as human beings. And, I don't have to describe all the school programs for sending students abroad to get a chance to experience what it means to live abroad in a different culture. And I have my own experience in that way, how much it changed me. And I just want to put that question back to you as well. What ways did it change you as people? Where you find meaning in your lives? What you dedicate yourselves to?
Okay. Keep it short, guys.
That's a big question. Very big question.
Do we have to put it in
One
a tweet
life-changing
format?
moment.
Yeah. Pretend you're writing a Twitter response, and then 140 characters.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a great question, nonetheless. It's a great question. Go for it, please.
I think I absolutely respect that question, and for myself, it was absolutely life-changing. I don't think I could even put that into words. For me, it's almost like I have a different perspective on how I approach my everyday, how I approach other people. I think it's humanized many things for me, I think. One negative thing, I think I perpetually feel homeless, if that makes sense. Because I can very easily adapt into any environment I go into, and whether that's personality or if that's experience in travel, I think it's probably both for me. I'll leave it at that, but all I can say, I don't even think I can put that into words, like what you described, because it was such a life-changing thing for me, and how that's actually kind of played into my now every day is that I pursued the field of cross-cultural communication, so how do people actually communicate across cultures? And that's, I kind of feel that was my destiny. I love what I do.
Go for it.
Okay. So for me, I guess the biggest part of me that changed, I think, from living abroad, and I mentioned it briefly in my first talk, but like communicating in a different language, and again, this is like, some languages I believe are really similar, and that you can express a lot of similar concepts between them. But for me, learning Japanese, it's almost like you can't have a direct translation from what you want to say in English into Japanese. And that's because a lot of like the core concepts, what you understand as the thing that you want to express or say, is different. And like understanding that was a really big kind of like, bridge to cross over. And I understood that because when you learn a new language, you have to say, okay, what do I want to say? Now let's take the words and turn them into a different language. But the only way to speak Japanese fluently, which I hopefully achieved to some degree, is to just think as a Japanese person. And then you'll notice you'll say stuff that you would never even want to say in English. And it becomes kind of strange, but then it's like and you develop this kind of new persona within yourself. So that was kind of a big thing for me. For no? I don't know. Well, probably what you're referring to, they do have a word for no. Probably what you're referring to is that they're very like beat around the bush. They won't say no expressly. There is a word for no, but they probably they don't like to use it. If you ask somebody like, hey, do you want to go do this? And they want to say no, then they'll probably just say, well, and they'll never really say no. They just kind of leave it hanging. Yeah, it's indirect communication.
Awesome. Well, I love both their answers. I could have easily said myself. The list is long, ways I've been changed. What I keep coming back to and keep telling people, and I don't know if it's a word, but I'll just use it, absolutism. And so I don't know what that is anymore. Because I'm always thinking in like 2 or 3 levels. I'm thinking about what people do here. I'm thinking about what people do in Ecuador. I'm thinking about what people do in Costa Rica. The language, so well said. I mean, so well, it's a trip when you learn a new language. You know, you have your whole way of saying things, and then to all of a sudden start speaking a whole other concept, your brain starts changing. And I've recently just started to learn about that kind of stuff scientifically, that your brain starts adapting to new linguistically speaking, it reforms your brain. I would say I used to be all about U.S., California, the 49ers, and football was king, right? And then I went away and had no football whatsoever. Maybe got a Miami feed, so I had to sit and watch the Dolphins. I mean, who watches the Dolphins? And I sat and learned about soccer. So I went and learned about soccer. So now I've got duality. So there's not absolutism, you know. And another funny little story, and I actually blogged about this, is I love the election because everyone's sitting there worrying about Democrats and Republicans. Well, I was sitting in Ecuador in 2007 where they had 500 political parties. Talk about straying from absolutism. I didn't even know who won. You know, it's like 500 parties. You know, it's like it was nonstop. Well, that absolutism of like one way is the way, one style is the way. If anything, I'm sitting there thinking about 4 ways I could do it. So it's kind of that's how I've changed. Because I'm not so straight and narrow on one way of thinking. It's varied and multiple. Very much so. Very much so.
Apropos what you all just said, this statistic may be a little bit dated, but the last statistic I heard was that 2/3 of Congress, certainly on becoming never had a passport. These are the people that make the right thing about
A nation of immigrants.
Go to France once when you're a kid or something, but they never did anywhere else. You have to know. These are the people who are like global world and global. That's
All right, so we need to close it there.
Hey, thank you all for coming tonight. Really appreciate it. It's going to be all every month. Those of you drink.